guns. All right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. The World Economic Forum CEO Klaus Schwab just announced that he will be stepping down from his role as Davos Man. What does this mean for the organization? Who is likely to take over control of the World Economic Forum? Also, an anti-CBDC bill is gaining traction in Congress. Will this potential legislation possibly put an end to the quest to establish a central bank digital currency in the United States? Join us as we talk about all these topics and more on episode 450 of the In the Tank podcast. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I've got a full crew. I got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you very much. How many Trump trials are going on? I believe one of them is almost over. Maybe it's the one in New York. It's hard to keep track. I'm sure he'll be brought up at The Hague, since we're talking about global governance. It would not be surprise me in the least that he'd be brought up charges on there as well. But happy to be on the podcast today. It's a beautiful day in Northern Illinois. Just absolutely perfect. My favorite time of year is late spring.
Yeah, I walked out this morning and I hear a humming throughout the entire neighborhood. The cicadas are in full effect over here in Northern Illinois. We got Justin Haskins, who's way further away than Illinois. He is I don't even know what your title is anymore. What's going on, Justin Haskins? How are you?
Who knows? I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing good. Good to be with you guys. This is a momentous day, honestly. We're going to be talking about one of the people who's inspired me the most, one of the people who's had the greatest impact on my life and career.
Enough about me, Justin. Go ahead.
No, the person I'm referring to has a lot less hair than you have. And it's just like, I know there's a lot of people who are celebrating, but I'm not. I'm gonna miss Klaus. I'm gonna miss him. So, I'm looking forward to a celebration of life ceremony today on the show. That's what I'm looking forward to.
That's what we should do. Also joining us, we have Chris Talgo, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. Chris, how are you doing today, good sir?
Doing good. I just want to say congratulations, Donnie. Number 450, big milestone. And I just want to ask you, since this podcast began before I was an employee at Heartland, what was the first episode about?
Oh,
con laws.
Certificate of need laws is the best bet. I'm gonna have to look that up during one of Jim's rants or something like that when we have time. But yeah, 450. I mean, roughly 50 episodes a year. Does that mean that we've been doing the podcast, or at least I've been doing the podcast for 9 years?
That can't be right.
That seems unbelievable to me. So I don't know. We'll have to do the math on that too.
That can't be right.
I mean, 52 episodes.
Has it always been weekly?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, I mean, the math says it.
So I had to check that one out too. But anyways, before we get going, that message that I put out there at the beginning of all of these episodes is that if you're an audio-only listener that's probably catching the show on a Friday or later, first off, write a review for us on iTunes. That'd be greatly appreciated. You can also join us a day earlier at noon Central Time on Thursdays, where we are live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. And you can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. And you can also help the show out by just doing a couple of things. One is hitting that like button, subscribing if you haven't already, sharing this content, leaving a comment on the video. All these things help break through those big tech algorithms and prevent content like this from being shown to more people. But let's get to it. Why don't we? The World Economic Forum is about to go through an unprecedented shakeup It was just announced that the founder and CEO Klaus Schwab will be stepping down from his executive role in January of 2025. Schwab has been CEO of the World Economic Forum since its inception in 1971. And since 1971, Klaus Schwab has played a pivotal role in shaping the forum into the globally recognized platform for public and private cooperation. Under his leadership, the World Economic Forum has brought together leaders from business, government, academia, and civil society to address some of the world's most pressing issues, from climate change to global health to economic inequality and technological advancements. Schwab's vision for a multi-stakeholder approach has fundamentally influenced global discourse and policymaking, making the World Economic Forum an influential voice in international affairs. So Klaus Schwab, thanks in part to us, I think, has become a figurehead for like the globalist agenda. I mean, if anyone's talking about like globalism and all of this sort of thing, like you'll generally see his face amongst a few other ones. Under his leadership, Schwab's World Economic Forum has spearheaded a whole list of issues that are concerning to probably everyone on this podcast, whether it's the Great Reset, ESG, stakeholder capitalism, the idea of in the future you'll own nothing. We've talked on the show numerous times about the Young Global Leaders Program. We've talked about synthetic foods and insect protein, a whole bunch of stuff that seems to be in his little basket of goodies. So when I saw the news that Schwab would be stepping down, it did come as a surprise to me. But Justin, I want to hear your initial thoughts first on the news. Were you surprised when you saw? I think one of us here shared it with you. What was your initial reaction?
I was surprised because I was under the impression that they were just going to upload him into a computer and he was going to live forever. Mm-hmm. So a little disappointing because I kind of thought that he would always be the head of the World Economic Forum, because they always mention he's 86 years old. 86 years old means nothing in when you're uploaded into a computer, right? Which is essentially what he wants to do if you actually read a lot of his work. So I would guess given his age, it kind of seemed obvious at some point this was going to happen. We've also heard rumors for at least the past few years that there are some folks at the World Economic Forum that aren't too happy with Klaus and just the way that he manages, and some people are unhappy with his extravagant lifestyle. He lives a very extravagant lifestyle there in Davos, and he has very expensive office, and he's well compensated. And I think people, this is supposed to be a nonprofit, so some people are a little concerned about that. But I think management wise, I think people have suggested he's a little bit of a tyrant, which probably surprises a lot of you, I know. And that he's taken an organization that for a while had this reputation of being very, we're just, trying to figure out the best ways of making the world a better place with big corporations. And he's turned it into like this thing that's become a caricature, that it's like the go-to thing that you want to point to when you're talking about global elites. Like that's who you talk about now. You talk about Davos, you talk about the World Economic Forum. And really, when you think about it, how many organizations in the world can say that they are hated, like loathed, not just disliked or whatever, but loathed by people on the far left and people on the far right at the same time? Like, there's very, very few people. That's rarefied air, really. There are inconsequential people who both people on the left and the right don't like, but there's very few people who actually matter, organizations that actually matter, where you get protesters. Like the World Economic Forum can get protesters from both the far left and the far right. It's possible. And that's pretty impressive. And so I think the whole Great Reset thing, that was a total disaster. One of the worst PR moves of all time, naming their big plan to transform the global economy, the Great Reset, making it so obvious what they were doing. They were for a long time working on these same kinds of policies like ESG and stakeholder capitalism, getting the private sector to do the bidding of the public sector, this public-private partnership thing that had been going on for a long time. But most people didn't know it or realize what was happening. And it wasn't until they started talking about how they're going to push the reset button on the entire global economy and rewrite social contracts and how we need a great reset that everybody started paying attention to that. And if he hadn't done that, I mean, Donald and I talked about this. We brought the Great Reset. We were some of the first people to notice the Great Reset and to really dissect what it was. And if they hadn't called it the Great Reset and they hadn't issued these statements with all these creepy quotes in it from powerful leaders, I don't think we would have ever figured it out, just because I don't think we would have ever thought to look. And so massive, massive mistakes. And I think he's gotten a lot of pushback from that, but I don't think that's what's going on here. I think this is purely just an age thing. He's in his mid 80s. It's probably time for him to move on. There are other people, and this is the good news. This is because I know there's a lot of people who are sad to see Klaus go. The good news is this. There are lots of other people at the World Economic Forum just like him. And don't you worry. One of them will be in charge next. It's not like we're going to now transition to like a Donald Trump type character at the World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to happen. What's
I'm
going to
gonna
happen
throw my
now
hat in
is-
the ring. I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring.
You should. You should. I don't know. I don't know what your odds are. Probably not great, but you should do that. I think that there are a lot of names that have been thrown out there. I don't know. Are we going to talk about that at some point?
Oh yeah.
I won't jump ahead. Okay,
Yeah, we
so we'll wait for that later. But all of them essentially have one thing in common, and that is that they share the same ideology with Klaus Schwab. And so truly, I will say, if we're going to give him any credit at all, because he truly is a diabolical figure in many ways. He's like a George Soros type figure in many, many ways. He thinks he's making the world a better place. I think he really does believe that, but he thinks the world can only become a better place if elites have more power over society. And so that makes him a villain in my mind. But if we're going to give him credit for anything, it should be this. Very few people who are not in government have had as big of an impact on government as Klaus Schwab. Very, very few people historically. This guy has had a massive, massive impact on our lives. In most people had never even heard of him until a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago. And that is truly an impressive feat.
We got a couple of clips that we've collected over the years of covering the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and some of the creepy things that he says. So, Jim, I'm going to come to you next, but let's go ahead and play the one clip that we have labeled as "Built by Us." There's a million clips like this, but this is just a small kind of example of just his, mindset when it comes to building the future or whatever you want to phrase it. So let's go ahead and play the "Built by Us" clip if we have that one ready, please.
Let's also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room. We have the means to improve the states of the world. But two conditions are necessary. The first one is that we act all as stakeholders of larger communities, that we serve not our only self-interests, but we serve the community. That's what we call stakeholder responsibility. And second, that we collaborate. And this is the reason why you find many opportunities here during the meeting to engage into very action and impact-oriented initiatives to make progress related to specific issues on the global agenda.
So, Jim, we could find like a million clips of him talking about the future is built by us. We're trustees of the future. I mean, seemingly the mindset is that, just the future of the world is just shaped by Klaus Schwab and some of the people that are sitting in the room with them. I know he says stakeholders, but I'm not sure how many, janitors and fast food workers are invited to this conference. So what are your thoughts on Klaus Schwab's potential exit here in early next year?
Yeah, well, you asked me if I had saved any of my classic Klaus Schwab clips from over the years that we've talked about him. And of course, I would never throw any of those away. I was saving them to tell scary campfire stories, and pull out the audio out of my iPhone. for this, but it's kind of like the combination of a megalomaniac and a tyrant. Well, I suppose most tyrants are megalomaniacs, but that quote, let's also be clear that the future is not just happening. The future is built by us, a powerful community here in this room. I mean, that is literally like Dr. Evil's whole crew in the movie Austin Powers, all sitting around a table, that they are the ones who are going to plan the future. I agree with Justin. I mean, you're so out of touch with ordinary Americans and with the lives of not Americans, but anybody in the world, of ordinary people, and what they do to survive or thrive, or what their goals are, or what makes them happy. You're so out of touch with ordinary people that it is nothing to you to spend decades marinating in the elites, and to his entire purpose was to gather elites to tell them, those thoughts you have in your head, those thoughts where you think the world is wrong because it doesn't agree with what you personally think how things should be organized. There's a lot of us who think this way. And what we need to do is get together and to make sure that we can just do all of these plans together. And, the happiness of me, the happiness of you listening to this podcast, they don't mean anything to these people. They really do believe that the powerful community right here in this room can build a new future. Inherent in that assumption, that mindset, is the idea that the world as it is today is broken, that it's wrong. Now, obviously, there are lots and lots of problems in the world. That's called humanity. Humanity will always have problems. And this idea that global elites are the only ones who have all the answers to make everybody live a better life. To me, I don't even know if that's actual delusion. But I do know that it's very scary, because that kind of mindset, again, which Klaus Schwab not only has, but all the people that come to the World Economic Forum confabs in Davos on their private planes and live lives that ordinary people could not even imagine, all of those people believe that they need to change everything about your way of life. And when I was looking up all of these clips that I've saved of these absolutely crazy things people say, and how in his last years as head of WEF, Klaus Schwab was very focused on the Great Reset. And the fact that he would call it the Great Reset, as Justin pointed out, was a huge blunder. But they are so out of touch with everybody else in the world that it never occurred to them that term, the Great Reset, would be creepy and considered dangerous by ordinary people. And so we have seen, I know some people in the comments here have noticed that, they have a theory that Klaus is stepping down because he hasn't been able to shut his yap, and the people are waking up to what the WEF has planned for us. And when I was looking at all these clips, I had several that didn't include Klaus Schwab, but things that were at his forums, such as just saying, we should have health passports. And if you are doing everything the World Health Organization says, you're allowed to move around freely. And if you don't, then you're not going to be able to do that. And that way, when the next pandemic comes, we won't have to shut down the entire global economy. The people who do what they're told and do exactly what the WHO says, they'll be able to continue their lives, and the rest of us would not. I have to thank Klaus Schwab for this very thing, that he has for years now brought people together who will speak freely and frankly, and with no guilt, no shame, no embarrassment, about how they think of the rest of us and what they really want to do if they actually gain all of the power that they desire. And we have another clip here where Klaus Schwab talks about how, graduates of the World Economic Forum Youth Leadership Program, or something that he calls it, are all over Western democracies in positions of power. So, the chess pieces have been moved into place. And Klaus Schwab will probably expect to sit back in his retirement, and he certainly would want to live long enough, if he's not uploaded to a computer, to see his ultimate plans come to fruition.
Yeah, let's go ahead and play that cabinets one. This one's got to be one of the most. Well, no, I was going to say it's the most one of the most extreme videos of him, but there's so many to choose from. But this one's up there, probably in the top 10. Here's Klaus Schwab talking about the Young Global Leaders program. So go ahead and play that.
This notion to integrate young leaders is part of the World Economic Forum since many years. When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina, too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. Mm-hmm. I mean, with the president, who is a young global leader, but...
Yeah, so again, he's left his mark. He's left his mark well beyond just the walls of the World Economic Forum in Davos. Chris,
look at the look on his face and the way he smiles like a proud father about all of his sons and daughters who have been infiltrating, free countries.
Right. Chris, I want to hear your take on this. What do you think?
Well, here's what I need to do. Can you please pull up the picture, the Babylon Bee picture?
Babylon Bee picture.
Put that front and center, please.
Here we are.
Okay, so this is going to apply mostly to our viewers. I'm sorry for the listeners. They will need to become viewers if we can get this thing up. So I have inside information, Donnie. Klaus Schwab is starting a new clothing line, and it's going to be all based on this futuristic new garb. And that's what he's going to do. And you know what? He's going to make a $250 billion doing it. And we're all going to have to wear his new cape gown things with that, whatever that thing is in the middle. And we're all just going to have to wear Klaus Schwab's, pajama pants, just like, the Chinese, just like the Chinese had to under Mao, So that's what this is really all about.
I think so.
He's going to corner the market on this new, I don't even know what you call it. Those are just some giant lapels. Damn. I mean, what is that thing? So that's really what's going on here. I solved the mystery.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, okay, so...
And he's going to go to planet Zarkon 7 and found his new colony, I guess.
So Klaus Schwab is 86 years old, so it shouldn't come off as like too much of a surprise that he might just be riding off into the sunset in some sort of retirement. But like Justin, I also remember the story from, I think it was last year, about forces amassing in his own organization to oust the founder. So I have this article. I think I put it in the show notes, but it's published at stoppingsocialism.com. It's titled "Klaus Schwab's Time Might Almost Be Up." And so reading from that article, it says, according to The Guardian, a group of current and former WEF members contacted them saying, quote, Schwab was a law unto himself and surrounded himself with nobodies that were incapable of running the organization. He is completely unaccountable to anyone inside or outside the organization, these sources quote. Members of this emerging group have attempted to air their concerns on social media, but claim the World Economic Forum pressured social media companies to remove them. They claim they are, quote, hesitant to come forward as Klaus is very well connected and can make life very difficult for us even after we leave the World Economic Forum. Further, and this is also quoting this unnamed source, Klaus picks his leaders using the same criteria Putin uses to pick deputies for his state Duma: loyalty, guile, and sex appeal. So that's supposedly, I don't know. I mean, this kind of predates this latest occurrence by a year and a half or so. But it also reminded me of, I think it was like a Vanity Fair article. Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong on here. You and I did a video on this, where it was basically out explaining like the real personality of Klaus Schwab and like his massive office and like a corner spot and wherever office complex that he's in, and how he was like trying to get somebody fired for having the audacity of parking in his parking spot while he was on the other side of the world or something like that. So like the guy who tries to paint himself as caring about inequality and the common folk and all the stakeholders or all of this stuff, apparently that's just a ruse that he puts on. But I just kind of wonder if, there's two things here. There's like two theories. One, he's 86 years old, so he's going to retire. Or two, this is kind of a long-awaited, like pushing him out of the organization movement that's been happening for at least a couple of years here. Justin, any thoughts? Any thoughts on those two options?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think to some extent, this whole thing is maybe falling apart for them a little bit.
Globalism has taken a lot more shots in the guts recently than I think in a while.
Don't you think that for a long time, I mean, we've talked about this. I mean, this is a lot of the work that we've done over the past several years has been focused on unveiling what has been happening with these massive financial institutions, with Davos, big corporations, government. They're all working hand in hand, right? And what we learned was a lot of this has been put into place over decades, slowly. It was methodical how they put all these different things into place to build this massive superstructure where they have huge amounts of influence. And then COVID happened and it was like, okay, guys, time to like take this big machine that we've been building and finally start, let's turn it on to high power and let's actually start resetting the global economy. Like that was really what was happening. Then people realized what was going on, and now there's this massive backlash against it. And I think they were kind of surprised. I think they thought people were looking for the strong hand to guide them in the midst of COVID. And when they realized that a lot of people didn't want that, I think were surprised by it and then reacted by saying, no, like we're not actually, trying to do all of that. We're looking out for you, and we're not actually, this is all conspiracy theory stuff. And then people learned more and more and more about it and realized, no, actually, this isn't a conspiracy theory. You guys really are seizing control over much of our lives and economies and all the stuff. And it's been happening for years, and we're just now learning about it. And the whole facade fell apart. And really, it depends on that. The only way that elites get control is if people are desperate and they voluntarily give it to them, or elites quietly take control and nobody notices, and it depends on no one noticing. And I think they're now in a situation where everybody notices it now, so they can't go that route. And they thought that people wanted it, and in reality, they don't, and there's been a huge backlash against them. And they're in this really weird spot right now where just going to Davos is now like bad for your reputation, and at least among a lot of people. And so I don't know how much longer this whole thing, maybe it goes on like it's been going on, and they get more and more power and more control, and they're able to navigate all these problems without any issue. Maybe the whole thing falls apart and they have to go back to the drawing board and figure out another way to do this, because they'll never stop. Elites never stop, but they will try to figure out a way to do this maybe that isn't so conspicuous, because this was just a little bit too obvious, having a big conference where everybody flies in on their private jets every year and eats $1,000 shrimp cocktails with, the shrimps are half gold, half shrimp. Like, I think people realized this is, this is like pretty outlandish. Everyone can see what's going on here. I don't know. And so it will be interesting to see how successful this organization is without Klaus Schwab. Another really interesting thing too, that I just want to add real quick is the balance of power going to shift away from Davos to maybe some other emerging epicenter of this way of thinking, like say United Arab Emirates or some place like that? And is that now going to become sort of the weight behind everything? Because Europe, generally speaking, it's becoming less powerful. They have all these issues that are going on with all sorts of different things, migration and the war in Ukraine and everything else. And there are these emerging economies in the East. Some of them are completely opposed to the Great Reset way of thinking, and others have leaned completely into it. And are those up and coming places going to become the new sort of focus of all of this? Like I said, United Arab Emirates, they are one of these up and coming countries in this Davos space. And so that might happen as well. And maybe Klaus Schwab was the glue holding all of this together in Europe, and now it shifts someplace else. And Joe Biden really has not done them any favors because he's been a total disaster. He's maybe on the road to losing this election. If he does win this election, it will only be because people don't like Donald Trump. It's not going to be because they like Joe Biden. Joe Biden has been such a failure economically. Nobody has any faith in elites at all right now.
Right.
And so all this thing could be crumbling. It really could. I think it's possible.
Well, there's an interesting thing that I think is unique to Klaus Schwab. He has a fascination with futurism, the concept of fourth industrial revolution technologies, all that sort of stuff. You could find a million clips of him talking about brain chips and mind reading devices and living longer and humanoid robots, artificial intelligence, you name it. He wrote a book titled The Fourth Industrial Revolution, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And this is actually one of the things that I actually do find very interesting about Klaus Schwab. But I kind of wonder, like, if any of his anyone that's going to be like succeeding him in this position will share that fascination with these sort of things. But the last clip that I want to play of Klaus Schwab is him actually talking about brain chips. So if we have that one ready, let's go ahead and hit play on that, please.
But can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants, and we measure your brain waves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react, or I can feel how the people react to your answers. Is it imaginable?
Yeah. So, Chris, what do you think? I mean, I'm going to miss that. I don't know if we're going to ever have a World Economic Forum leader that's speaking in front of all these super important people at these conferences talking about reading their minds one day. But what do you think?
I mean, I think that it's scary that we are on the brink of these new technologies. But I think it's especially scary because people like Klaus Schwab and people who want to exert maximum control on a global level are, I think, extremely excited for these kinds of technologies because it will make their job much easier. I constantly say this. I think Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong would have just loved to have the technologies that are coming our way soon, because it makes it so much easier for them to implement their societies where they want to control everything, micromanage everybody, and determine who gets what based on what. So it's almost like the clunky old system in North Korea, the public distribution system, is going to be replaced by this digital these new technologies that are coming down the pike probably sooner than we can all even imagine. And it's going to make people who want to exert maximum control, like Klaus Schwab, total control freaks, I think it's just going to make it easier for them. And not only is it going to make it easier for them, but it's almost as if people are doing this, like willingly, because people, when you just think about this, I think we're still in like the Stone Age of this whole like digital revolution. And when you look in, when you look into the future and think, wow, man, a couple, decades from now, maybe even like, century or so from now, people are going to look back at this time period and say, I can't believe they actually had cell phones. Like they didn't have those like things like implanted in their brain and all this stuff. So I think that that Klaus Schwab is, identifying, hey guys, this is a great way for us to be able to implement, our global totalitarian vision. And we can do it, and the people will willingly accept it, and then we can use that technology against them. So I think that is why he is so obsessed with this fourth industrial revolution, and all these new budding technologies, brain implants and such like that, because it will give him and his ilk much more ability to exert control and power over the masses.
Yeah, one of those topics, one of those things is central bank digital currencies, which we're going to get to in a minute. But just kind of one last thing, Jim. There's been talk about the replacement of Klaus Schwab. Some of the names being thrown around include European Central Bank Chief Christine Lagarde, Borge Brende, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. I've heard Dick Dastardly is thrown his name in contention. Super Shredder from Ninja Turtles, Skeletor from He-Man. All of these people, I think, have a shot at becoming leader. But just in your opinion, do you think that the composition of the World Economic Forum will change in a substantial way, or do you think it's just going to be business as usual for this elite organization?
Well, I'm pulling for Skeletor. I mean, I think that would be the most entertaining option.
Well, she's not Speaker of the House anymore, so
that's right.
Boom!
Yeah. And the thing about the WEF is that nobody gets a vote. Even when you vote in your free country to reject the WEF, their agenda marches on in your very country. COVID showed that. But in that last clip we saw, I only noticed it there. Watching it here live on the podcast, Klaus Schwab was talking with Sergey Brin, who, of course, founded Google, which is one of the most spying technological companies and one of the most powerful companies ever created in human history. And it made me think for a minute. People talk about like there's old money and then new money. Especially up there in the Northeast, people who came over on the Mayflower and have been a member of the country club since, 1877 and all that kind of stuff. Well, the people that get new money, that made their money on Wall Street or something, they crave the approval and the love of the people with old money. They always have a sense of, no matter how rich they get, they tend to have a sense of inferiority complex compared to the people with old money, even if they are wealthier than that. Than the old money people. And so I see what the new money people like Sergey Brin and the new elites are exploited by the old elites like Klaus Schwab. So no matter what happens, whoever takes over, even if it's somebody younger, and I don't think they'll pick somebody that young. They probably want faster turnover, but it's going to make sure that it stays in the hands of the old elite and not the new elite, because the new elite are much more helpful and much more, they do a lot more for the agenda when they are like the little brother, always looking for the affection and the love and the approval of the older brother. So, the WEF marches on. The Great Reset, we probably heard that for the last time out of the leader of the World Economic Forum. They'll come up with some other less dystopian sounding phrase to encapsulate their agenda, but the agenda will march on.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we will be keeping an eye on it. He's still going to be hanging around. He'll still be in office for us to get his annual Christmas card in December. But then, January of 2025, he's supposed to be on the out. So we'll see if any other decisions are made or if there's any kind of front runners when it comes to leadership or any signaling if it's going to turn into some sort of changing of the trajectory of the organization. We'll be keeping an eye on it as we do at the Heartland Institute. But
Johnny,
let's move on.
Well, okay.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you think back, so in 1971, Klaus Schwab formed this. 50 years later, it has grown into a just enormously powerful institution. Why would I think that in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years that would be reversed, that would reverse itself? I think if anything, the World Economic Forum is gaining allies, at the, supranational level, with these globalist institutions, whether it's the United Nations, WHO, just all of them. And I'm actually worried that the next leader could be more, persuasive, a better political leader, and just better at getting all these entities to cooperate toward the common goal. So, the old thing of the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. I mean, Klaus Schwab, I obviously disagree with him on all these policies, but at least he, was not very capable of, moving it into the next generation. The fear in my mind is that you get a young person there who has, much more savvy and much more, of a, future orientation. And
things could get worse, not better. But
Yeah,
we shall
well, you know,
see.
here's a prediction for you. I'll make a prediction before I move on. Just in the handful of years that we've been really paying attention to the World Economic Forum and Davos and all of that, I have personally noticed a shift in the kind of the topics of the sessions or panels or speeches or whatever that they have at Davos, where like a few years ago it was like, oh man, I gotta watch the one on brain chips, and oh man, I've got to watch the one on digital dictatorships, or the one that was Justin, you remember this one? It was moderated by like somebody from CNN, and it was like, are we ready for a new world order? Like,
Yeah.
compared to like more recent years where it's like, oh, fractured economic system and pulling together in a new age or whatever. It's just like kind of gotten more bland, and I wonder if that's because of the kind of the increased spotlight on them, and I wonder if getting rid of Klaus Schwab, bringing in somebody that's a little bit more boring, if in the future we're going to see Davos coming and going with just a little bit more of a kind of like a rigid adherence to just like basic like economics and coming together or whatever, just really bland topics. They're trying to like tone down their like craziness that they might have been a little bit more open to a handful of years ago.
Now, see, I view it very differently. I view it as that's the way it used to be. So I remember like watching, the World Economic Forum annual meetings like back in the day, 10, 20, and not 20 years ago, but like 10 years ago or so, like, when Maria Bartiromo was covering for CNBC and stuff. And it was just a bunch of CEOs kind of getting together saying, hey, how can we kind of like, just make our businesses, more able to, work internationally and such. It's gone from that to this crazy, like totalitarian, globalist, agenda. And I just don't see that receding anytime soon. I could be completely wrong on this, but it just seems to me, because I've been watching this organization for, 10, 12 years now. And it started as a just, as a business oriented, almost like business friendly, pro capitalism. Hey, let's have, make sure that everyone's, on the same page, business wise, to actually, we want to tell you what to eat, where to live, how to live, and just like all this other stuff. So the fact from my perspective is it's going more in that direction. And I don't see that reversing anytime soon, but I could be completely wrong. The next leader could come in and say, wait a second, we're way outside our original mission, and let's, retreat and go back to the original mission. Or they could say, wait a second, we really want to take this fourth industrial revolution stuff. We really want to take this, globalism stuff and take it to a whole new level. I don't know, but we shall see.
We will see, I think. All right, let's move on. So the U.S. House of Representatives is supposed to be taking on an anti-CBDC bill this week. The bill, known as the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act, is sponsored by Representative Tom Emmer and currently has 165 co-sponsors. The description of the bill reads, quote, to amend the Federal Reserve Act to prohibit the Federal Reserve banks from offering certain products or services directly to an individual, to prohibit the use of central bank digital currency for monetary policy and for other purposes. So before we get into this, I do want to do a little bit of a refresher on CBDCs, just because this is a little bit of a wonk topic. So seemingly, one of the strategies behind implementing a CBDC is to downplay its importance. Even if you are in a position to hear about it, brought up in the media or whatever, it may come off as that like a CBDC is no different than just like how we generally use our money today. I mean, I personally don't use cash very often. 99% of the time I'm, paying through my debit card or through an app. So, your average person might think, well, what's the difference, to me if they formally created a digital currency to replace the dollar? So this is a misconception. A CBDC would be an entirely new currency, although many hearing about CBDCs might think it's, they might be familiar with Bitcoin. So you might think that a CBDC is like sort of a cryptocurrency and similar in design and practice, and they are not. Okay, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or a handful of other ones that you might hear about are a very decentralized system with no real central authority, where data and information are protected on a distributed ledger system. And this makes them secure, not malleable to a controlling body. They're very independent. A CBDC, on the other hand, is actually closer to the opposite of that in many ways. CBDCs are inherently centralized. They are not independent at all. They are potentially and completely controllable by a central controlling body like a central bank or something like that. And advocates of CBDCs tout it as beneficial for a number of reasons. They argue that it's increased efficiency in payment systems, reduced transaction costs, enhanced financial inclusion for people that are underbanked populations, control and security. They could be used to combat illicit activities, money laundering, tax evasion. It offers the ability to incorporate new financial tools, including like stimulus injections that you don't have to wait for like a paper check to reach your mailbox. They literally just pump money into your account, stuff like that. All transactions are tracked in detail, all that sort of thing. But also, and when you're listening to our show, we'll talk about this a lot, is the potential of these digital currencies to be programmable. And this is all taken from stuff that we've seen or been seen proposed in other countries or proposed in even Federal Reserve white papers. And that includes potential limits on what you can spend the currency on, limits on how much you can spend, where you can spend it, expiration dates that could be encoded directly into the unit of currency. The possibilities are essentially limitless. Last summer, the Brazilian CBDC code was reverse engineered by a blockchain developer and revealed that there were certain features that were programmed into this digital currency, including the ability to freeze funds or even unilaterally adjust balances in accounts. So there's a ton of potential on this. I mean, I remember us talking about, there was this one story, there was a firm called Carbon Cloud that was trying to develop grocery store metadata on products that would track, the carbon footprint of products that you might buy at the grocery store. And I could just imagine how that information could be incorporated into a CBDC type programmable system that would put a limit on what your carbon footprint of your, weekly grocery bill might be. All of these things would be impossible for a normal currency like we currently have, but completely possible in a CBDC type system. So that's where like the big caution comes from people like us that are very skeptical of increased government power and all of that. I referenced Federal Reserve discussion papers. I've been combing through these last couple of weeks. And they have some pretty alarming stuff in there. In one paper, I don't think I have the link to this in the show notes, but I can find it. There was suggestions for access limits to this digital currency, transaction size limits, holding limits, convertibility limits. The authors of the paper write, quote, programmability could be enabled within several layers of a CBDC architecture, such as the platform, coin and token, contract, and wallet level. So it could be controlled at like multiple levels of this sort of system. So the point I'm trying to get across is that a CBDC is a big deal, as it allows for an incredible amount of control over society and the economy. So like I said, there is some legislation that seems to be gaining a little bit of traction in Congress. I'm not sure if it's going up for a formal vote this week, maybe next week. But Justin, what are your thoughts on this legislation? And do you think it has any dream possibility of going through? What do you think?
There's no chance of it being passed. There's a variety of reasons for that, of course, but the most I don't think it has any chance of being passed in Congress, because there are actually some Republicans that have, and I don't have the list in front of me, but there are some Republicans that have been openly in favor of doing some kind of CBDC, although they'll say that they want to build in privacy protections to it and all this other crap, which, I wouldn't trust at all. But there's no way it'll get through Congress, because there are a lot of Democrats that like this already. More power, more control, more centralization, easier to print money, easier to keep tabs on what people are doing, easier to stop people from doing the things that you don't like, all the things that Democrats love. So there's no way that they're going to support it. And then there are some Republicans that like it too, because they think that we need to do this to compete with China and other countries that are developing CBDCs of their own. So not going to happen in Congress. But even if it did, by some miracle, get through the House, get through the Senate, it will die on the president's desk, because Joe Biden is a a supporter of CBDCs, or at least his administration is. They put out that executive order a couple years back, openly calling for the government to study CBDCs, produce reports about the benefits and potential problems with CBDCs. A bunch of agencies within the Biden administration produced those reports, basically saying CBDCs would be great. There are some issues we got to work through, but basically there's all these great benefits to CBDCs. So if Biden had the votes in Congress to get a CBDC passed, I think he would. Interestingly, we still don't know for sure what the Biden administration's position is on whether he can unilaterally create a CBDC on his own without Congress. Because one of the things that the executive order called for was a report from the Department of Justice saying whether it was necessary for Congress to pass a law to create a CBDC. And the Department of Justice supposedly wrote the report because they were required to by law, based on the executive order, but then they never released it to the public. And as far as I can tell, they have still never released it to the public. In fact, Republican members of Congress, this was maybe a year or two ago, sent a letter to the Department of Justice saying, we want the report. Give us the report because we know that you produced it. I mean, you haven't made it public. And they didn't do it. So no one knows what the position is officially of the federal government about whether they can just create a CBDC on their own. So Biden is in favor of it. The only reason you wouldn't issue that report is because you don't want, you're hoping that someday you get to issue a CBDC and you want to keep your options open, right? If you were opposed to it, then this wouldn't be an issue. So there's no chance of this legislation passing right now. What everybody in the CBDC world is waiting on is what happens in the 2024 election. If Joe Biden hangs on and becomes president again, or maintains his presidency, and then you get a Congress that switches from red to blue in the House, then they'll have the votes to put a CBDC into law. I'm certain of that. That's the next step. If that doesn't happen for whatever reason, and Biden continues to be president, but let's say the Republicans hang on to one of the House of Representatives, or maybe they take the Senate too, whatever. The next step is probably going to be taking a really hard look at just issuing a CBDC by executive order. And then there'll be lots of legal challenges, and they'll roll the dice and hope that things go their way in the courts. I think that's where we're headed next. This bill is not going to accomplish anything right now. What is really good about it, though, because some people might hear me saying all this and say, well, this sounds pointless. It's not pointless, because the way that really important legislation gets passed oftentimes is that it gets proposed a lot of times, and then eventually it breaks through when you have the votes, right? And so it's important to write the legislation. You get the ideas out there. You get lots of members of Congress and the public understanding what's going on and why this exists. And then when the opportunity presents itself, you make a really hard push to actually try to get it passed. If Donald Trump becomes president, Donald Trump's openly opposed to CBDCs. Donald Trump becomes president and Republicans take control of the Senate and they maintain control of the House. You might actually get this bill passed in 2025 or 2026. So that's why this is really important. And I think there's a legitimate chance that could play out exactly that way. So what's really incredible about this is, although most people don't understand this, and it's just not the sexiest topic in the world, monetary policy or whatever, if you're going to go back in the history of the United States and look at what are some of the most pivotal moments in the history of the United States of America that affected decades and decades and decades of policy and things that happened after the fact, absolutely one of the most important moments that ever happened was the creation of the Federal Reserve, a move to the fiat monetary system that we have now, where the dollars are basically, they're not tied to anything other than just the faith, the credit and good faith of the American government. That whole idea, that at the time probably didn't seem like a sexy topic either. And it
Sure.
really transformed everything that happened after it. All the government spending, everything that happened. That was such a pivotal moment, moving completely off of the gold standard, which happened later on. All these things make a big difference. And we're at that moment right now where it could go either way. We could either have a president who comes in and is pro-decentralized cryptocurrencies and anti-CBDCs and passes a law that forbids a CBDC forever, again, needing a Congress that would do that. Or we could have a CBDC next year. Like that could happen, at least the early stages of that happening. Or we could have some intermediary ground where you get the Federal Reserve doing some kind of CBDC that's between banks, but isn't what they call a retail CBDC, where consumers are using it regularly as sort of a intermediary step to get to a retail CBDC at some point in the future. But we have a chance to either completely run away from this idea and reject it while the authoritarian regimes of the rest of the world embrace it lovingly, or we can do what they're doing and go down this road and find out pretty quickly how dangerous it is to have a programmable central bank digital currency that's controlled by the Federal Reserve or by the federal government. It's one of these turning point moments in American history, and that's why we're talking about it. But other people, but we need more people to talk about it because
that's the thing. Yeah, I mean that's the thing, because obviously, like ESG was one of these like issues that your average person didn't know about or whatever. But once we hit some sort of like inflection point where it became part of the national discourse, as far as conservative media or whatever, like ESG became like a thing people talked about. Then it's like the dam broke, and we saw a whole bunch of movement just in the public discourse, in state legislators, even at the federal level, to be like against ESG. And I feel like CBDC is still kind of behind that dam of just people like giving a damn about it. See what I did there? And that's kind of why I'm like always trying to like bring this up as a topic, because like it is an incredibly important one. And I feel like once people recognize the importance of it, hopefully that dam breaks and we see the same sort of anti-CBDC movement, flow downstream from all of this. But Jim, do you agree? Do you think that we're still in that kind of like just trying to open the eyes of the public when it comes to this issue phase of this whole fight against CBDCs? What's your take on this and the potential legislation here? And if you don't unmute yourself before I finish saying this, I'm going to lose my mind. Go ahead, Jim.
All right. Yeah. Do I think federal legislation will get anywhere this year? No, I'm not confident of that. And certainly we don't have a president that would sign that. I think it's, you brought up this topic as something to talk about today, and it was going to be, pretty much it is the main topic in point of fact, but I did want to talk about Klaus Schwab as well, and the two, the WEF's power and a central bank digital currency would be probably the most powerful tool of the global elites. There would be hardly anything to rival it, other than maybe planting chips in people's brains and using AI and controlling people. So, because when you control finance, you control everything. You control, as it is right now, just with people complain maybe isn't the word, but people notice that the World Bank has been implementing a green energy agenda by fiat around the globe. And that is a dangerous, that shows you the danger and the power of the World Bank, because they refuse to issue loans to emerging economies and countries, like say in Africa, that wish to Africa extremely rich in natural resources. And they could give everybody electricity, and it could be cheap. They could use natural gas, they could use coal, but the World Bank will not allow that to happen, because they've now decided just by themselves that in order to quote unquote save the planet, the only energy projects that we will smile upon and loan money for are wasteful, in fact, are environmentally harmful, and is on an economy-wide scale useless wind and solar energy. They won't lend to nuke power plants either, as a matter of fact. So just the World Bank's power to affect policy on a global scale is pretty impressive. but a central, I always want to say CDBB. I say it the wrong way, but a CBDC would dwarf that power, and it would be spread farther, not just into the developing world, but really get its fingers into the developed world. And frankly, we're not talking about loaning to countries. We're talking about controlling the finance on an individual business and ultimately an individual person level. So when you control, like I said, outside of a mandatory chip planted in your brain, which I hope I'm long dead before those sorts of days come. But with the way things are going, it just keeps getting more dystopian as we move forward, and it is accelerating. But outside of that, it is through eliminating actual money and what we conceive, how we perceive money and how it's used and its value, and forming it into something else that is entirely controllable by the elites. And if you want to live, that gives them the ultimate power to organize how you live. And there's no tool in the box that would be more powerful than that. And so while I don't think this legislation might go anywhere, as is usually what needs to happen when something is new and legislation is necessary to protect our liberty and our freedom, it takes some time. So these sorts of bills need to be introduced often. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be debated. It needs to show up on news programs and podcasts like this, because the people, if given a voice, would never allow this to happen, would never want this to happen. So it could be as soon as let's just say a new president that is not Biden takes office in 2025, that maybe something like this would gain some traction and at least slow down for now what I would frankly say seems to be inevitable.
Yeah, and one other thing, I'm going to come to you, Chris. One other thing that I want to kind of get across is that, earlier when we were talking about Klaus Schwab, we were talking about like brain chips or something like that, which just seemed like a technology that's, increasingly possible. But, when it comes to being an actual thing for your average day citizen, years away. Whereas CBDCs is a lot more like on the kind of front burner when it comes to all of this stuff. The Atlantic Council, which puts together a CBDC tracker, they show that 134 countries representing 98% of the GDP in the world are exploring the idea of a CBDC. Of these countries, 68% are in advanced phases of exploration, development, pilot, or launch. 19 of the G20 countries are in advanced stages of CBDC development. And most recently, there was a story of the SWIFT, SWIFT, the Global Interbank Communications System, and how they're planning on a new CBDC platform that's going to be able to connect the wave of central bank digital currencies that are in development around the world. And according to a report from Reuters, again, I don't, maybe I have this in the show notes, I'm not entirely sure. But SWIFT just wrapped up a 6-month trial where they were putting together a system for a CBDC platform that could be erected in the next 12 to 24 months. So the 6-month trial that they just concluded involved 38 member groups composed of central banks, commercial banks, settlement platforms. Some of the central banks included Germany, France, Australia, Singapore, Thailand, quote, as well as a number that requested to remain anonymous, which I thought was pretty interesting. A raft of heavyweight commercial banks, including HSBC, Citibank, Deutsche Bank, a couple other ones that I'm not going to try to pronounce, as well as a couple of banks from China, were all part of this pilot program. So when SWIFT and other international organizations are putting together platforms that will facilitate the trade of CBDCs that are being developed in all of these countries around the world, it seems like this is an issue that we have to get in front of now. We don't really have time to wait. What do you think about this, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, countries around the world are going in this direction. I think that's because they want to replace the dollar as the, world's reserve currency. And by doing this, we would have basically it's like a global currency. But I want to take this in a different direction. So 2012, Mitt Romney was running for the presidential candidate on the Republican ticket, and he mentioned in a, I think it was a donor meeting, something about the 47% of the people in America who are quote unquote net takers, meaning they don't pay a penny in income taxes. They actually get more back from the government. Since 2012, that number has increased. I think, unfortunately, I'm going to be pessimistic here, that a CBDC would make it so much easier and so much more convenient for the people who are basically living off the government, who are living on the dole, to receive their, welfare payments and all their, government goodies in a very simple, efficient, fast manner. So therefore, I'm concerned that if 52, 53, 54% of the American population says, yeah, this would be great, I wouldn't actually have to go to the, unemployment office or go to the, SNAP office or whatever it is and sign up for these benefits. They would just automatically appear in my cool, CBDC account. I am afraid that it is going to become so popular among those people and among young people, because I think young people, in my experience, when I go, to buy something and pay in cash, and they're just like, oh, what is that? What is this stuff? They are so used to doing everything digitally, and they are so not afraid of the privacy and security implications that they will just accept this willy-nilly. Of course, this is a great idea. So I am concerned about the future of this becoming the replacement for the system, the cash, anonymous transactions that we've had in place in the United States for as long as we've been around. And I agree wholeheartedly with Justin, Jim, and you, Donnie, that this would be a complete game changer for America. In one fell swoop, you would do what Barack Obama sought to do in 2008, fundamentally transform the country. Mm-hmm. Because like Jim has said, and I could not agree more with him on this, if you have the ability to track everyone's transactions, and, in the future, they will, I'm sure, add on to this more regulations, more this, more that, where it's, hey, you know what, climate change is a big deal now. So yeah, you're spending too much money at the gas pump or whatever it is, that is going to fundamentally change the relationship between the government and the governed. I don't want to live in that kind of America, but I am fearful that we are moving in that direction. That's why I've devoted my life to try to fight against these things, because I think, on a very superficial level, people say, that's great. That would make my life easier. Of course we should do that. But they don't take the time to actually go into the details and what are called the unintended consequences of these kinds of things. Once something like this is in place, I think it's gonna be almost impossible to root it out. So right. I'm glad that people like Ted Cruz are ahead of the curve here, saying, guys, be scared of this. Don't fall for this. And I agree that the odds of this particular specific bill passing in the near future, it's slim to none, but the fact that we're getting this out into people's minds, the fact that, we are writing about this, op-eds about it, tip sheets and all sorts of stuff to try to inform people, hey, be scared of this. Don't just accept this, passively. I'm, somewhat optimistic that we can, possibly blunt this from happening in the future. And I really hope so, because as we saw with the people who were at near the Capitol on January 6th, what did Bank of America do? Bank of America worked with the federal government to say, we will give you all of their information, ATM transactions and all this stuff, so you can actually pinpoint where they were in real time. The same thing could be done with the CBDC. So the amount of surveillance that would be at the hands of the government in the case of a CBDC being the new normal would just make America look nothing like it is, nothing like it was. And we would be living in 1984, Big Brother, and just the nightmare of in a totalitarian, authoritarian regime, literally in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, the barter economy will make a big comeback in freedom-loving areas.
It's bizarre to me that this is like a partisan issue. Like when I was originally made aware of this bill, I was talking to you, Chris, and I was like, well, I don't know. There might be some Democrat co-sponsors on this. I looked through. There's none. And it just feels like if this was proposed in like the early 2000s, and like George Bush was president or something like that. Like I feel like all the people on the left would be totally against this. So I don't understand.
Absolutely, no,
that
is such a good point, because when the Patriot Act was being negotiated and debated, there were a lot of Democrats back in those days who were adamantly against the surveillance powers of the federal government. Wow, have they changed their minds on that? And it makes sense why, because the security state, whatever you want to call it, has basically aligned itself with the Democrats. And look at what they did in the election in 2016. Look what they did in 2020 with the Hunter Biden laptop and 51 of these so-called security surveillance experts. This is Russian disinformation. No, it wasn't. We know it wasn't, but they did it anyways, because for better or worse, and I think it's for much worse, the Democrat Party has aligned itself with that entity of the United States government, and that entity of the U.S. government is just running roughshod right now. And if you were to couple that with a CBDC, game over. Game over for us. Game over for anyone who loves freedom, who loves liberty, who loves privacy, private property rights. Game over.
Justin, any last thoughts on this issue? We're already 10 minutes ahead of schedule, or behind schedule to end the episode. But if you have any thoughts, especially on that partisan thing, I don't know. That's something I harp on a lot on this podcast, but it just continues to blow my mind.
No, I think it makes perfect. The ideology of the left is the ends justify the means. That's all it is. So it's very consistent with that ideology. So when George Bush was doing the Patriot Act, and they viewed George Bush and his, and people that they thought were loyal to him as being in control of the security apparatus in the United States, they saw it as a threat. The moment that they have control of all the institutions, they don't care about any of that. They used to be pro free speech on college campuses. That's because college campuses used to be run by a lot more conservative people, relatively speaking. They don't have any, there is no, the ideological consistency is in other areas, like their commitment to Marxism and to a variety of other, critical theories, critical race theory, things like that. They're pretty ideologically consistent there. But when it comes to their ideology about the government and central banks and corporations and how all these things interact with each other and how they treat people, they have no consistent ideology, because none of that actually matters to any of them. So that's why sometimes they can interpret the Constitution very narrowly, and other times they can interpret it very broadly, and they pick and choose which parts to listen to and which parts not to listen to, because it's all about the ends justify the means. So this fits right in line with that. If we had if most of the institutions of society were run by pro-liberty people that hated socialism and hated collectivism and progressivism, they would be completely opposed to this. But because we have the opposite situation, where most institutions are run by either socialists, progressives, etc., then they're in favor of those organizations having more power, because it means more power for their side, greater transformation of society. And that's what this is all about.
Donnie, just one more quick point. I'm always struck by how technology is supposed to make our lives easier, but many times in many facets, it doesn't. It makes it actually more complicated. So, for example, one of the people in the audience was talking about how when they go to use those like cashless apps, which those like the new norm everywhere, there seems to be lots of times where it's like having trouble. It doesn't go through, blah, 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 blah. Please remove your card, blah. It's just like, why this is, it's supposed to be simple, but it's not. Now, could you imagine if a CBDC is up and running and it's controlled by some, centralized bureaucracy? What about if there's like a problem? What if, like you're charged for something, or, just something happens? Good luck getting that like problem solved. Mm-hmm. The best thing now for most Americans is, if there's a problem, you can still go to your local bank and say, hey, I'm having a problem, like of whatever it is, and they can usually solve it. Good luck having a far away government, bureaucracy that is unaccountable and could not care less about people's concerns, actually, providing good customer service or whatever is necessary to solve problems that will inevitably come up. Because remember, in 2010, was it, when they launched healthcare.gov, that was a complete disaster. So if they can't even launch a website where you sign up for a damn 3 types of healthcare plans, what makes you think that they can launch the technological infrastructure that's going to be necessary to do something as complicated as this? I don't trust them.
If you're having trouble accessing your funds, just got to go to the DMV, take a number. They'll get it figured out.
Call this number and good luck, getting through,
Well, one of the most famous slogans of the WEF, of course, is "You'll own nothing and be happy." And with a central bank digital currency, you won't even own your own money and the fruits of your own labor. That won't actually be yours either. It'll be controlled elsewhere, and that's really, I think, the crux of it, and very dangerous.
Yeah, I've got like so much more notes on CBDC stuff. I just haven't been able to find a time to talk about it on this podcast. But when it comes to the implementation of it, we've seen it now. We're able to see it because of a bunch of different case studies that have been playing out across the world, how they go about kind of incorporating a CBDC into your daily life, different systems, and when it comes to like the banking system and how that would be changed, and whether or not you would have accounts directly with the Federal Reserve or the central bank. I have tons of notes on all of this. So in future episodes, I will find time to talk about elements when it comes to central bank-backed digital currencies, because like I said, I do think that it is an incredibly important topic, one that we cannot afford to sleep on. So gentlemen, any last words, any anecdotes, anything you want to get off your chest before we sign off for today? Hearing nothing, I want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. Audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, leave a review for us on iTunes. That'd be greatly appreciated. Also, you could join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. And you can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. You can also follow us on X at In the Tank Pod, or you can send us your comments, suggestions, or questions to the show by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on X Twitter, at Heartland Inst on X and Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. And same question to Justin.
At Justin T. Haskins on basically everything. You can also go to justinhaskins.com and check out. Actually, no, I don't want to steal it from Chris, so go ahead. You can.
All right. And Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
Well, I hope he was going to say check out heartland.org.
Yeah, he doesn't know where you're going with that
stuff there. But also,
I knew where you were going.
Okay, but yeah, also just happy Memorial Day weekend. I hope everyone does go outside, spend time, friends and family, get some good food, and this is the beginning of summer, and we should just celebrate and make sure that we are with the ones we care about.
That is a great way to end it. All right. Thank you all for tuning into this episode. We will talk to you next week.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.